Imagine for a moment the world of medieval Europe, stretching across centuries from roughly the 5th to the 15th century. This was not a single moment in time, but rather a vast tapestry of human experience woven across 1,000 years. The medieval period was a time when life moved to entirely different rhythms than those we know today. There were no clocks ticking on walls, no electric lights to extend the day, no automobiles rushing through streets. Instead, time was measured by the sun's arc across the sky, by the changing seasons, by the bells that rang from church towers calling people to prayer at regular intervals throughout each day. In this world, most people lived in small villages scattered across the countryside. These settlements were tiny by modern standards, often containing no more than a few dozen families. The houses were simple structures built from whatever materials the local environment provided. In England, you might find homes constructed from timber and clay, with thatched roofs made from bundled straw or reed. In other regions, stone was more common, leading to sturdy dwellings that could last for generations. The streets, if they could be called that, were narrow dirt paths that turned to mud during rainy seasons and became dusty tracks during dry spells. The daily rhythm of medieval life was intimately connected to the natural world. People rose with the dawn because candlelight and oil lamps were precious commodities not to be wasted. They worked during the daylight hours, whether in the fields tending crops, in workshops crafting tools and goods, or in the great halls of castles managing the complex social and economic relationships that held medieval society together. As darkness fell, activities gradually wound down. Families gathered around central hearths, sharing simple meals and perhaps stories passed down through generations. Food in the medieval world was seasonal and local in ways that might seem strange to us today. There were no refrigerators to preserve fresh meat, no global supply chains bringing exotic fruits from distant lands. Instead, people ate what grew nearby and what could be preserved through techniques like salting, smoking, or drying. Bread was a staple food, but it was often made from grains like rye or barley rather than wheat, which was considered a luxury. Vegetables came from small gardens tended carefully by hand. Meat was precious and often reserved for special occasions or for those wealthy enough to afford it regularly. The social structure of medieval society was complex and hierarchical, but it also provided a sense of place and purpose that many people found comforting. At the top were kings and nobles, who owned vast estates and held political power. Below them were knights, who served as warriors and administrators in exchange for land grants. Then came merchants and craftsmen in the towns, followed by the vast majority of the population, farmers and peasants who worked the land. While this system seems rigid to modern eyes, it also created communities where everyone had a role to play and relationships that could span generations. Religion was woven into every aspect of medieval life in ways that provided both structure and comfort. The sound of church bells marked the hours of each day, calling people to prayer at dawn, midday, and dusk. Sunday was a day of rest when communities gathered for worship and fellowship. The church calendar marked the passing of seasons with festivals and holy days that brought color and celebration to what might otherwise have been an endless cycle of work. Monasteries and convents served not only as centers of spiritual life but also as repositories of knowledge, hospitals for the sick, and refuges for travelers. The medieval world was also a place where craftsmanship reached extraordinary levels of beauty and sophistication. Skilled artisans created magnificent illuminated manuscripts, their pages decorated with intricate patterns and vivid colors made from precious materials like gold leaf and lapis lazuli. Stone carvers transformed cold rock into soaring cathedrals that seemed to reach toward heaven itself. Metalworkers forged not only practical tools and weapons but also delicate jewelry and ornate ceremonial objects. Textile workers wove complex patterns into cloth, creating tapestries that told stories and garments that were works of art. Trade networks crisscrossed the medieval world, connecting distant communities and bringing exotic goods to even remote villages. Merchants traveled dangerous roads carrying spices from the east, fine cloth from Flanders, amber from the Baltic, and countless other products. These trade routes were like arteries carrying the lifeblood of commerce, but they also carried ideas, stories, and cultural practices that enriched medieval life. A village market might feature goods that had traveled hundreds or even thousands of miles to reach their final destination. The medieval landscape itself was different from what we see today. Vast forests covered much of Europe, filled with deer, wild boar, wolves, and bears. These woodlands were not untouched wilderness but rather carefully managed resources providing timber for construction, fuel for heating and cooking, and hunting grounds for those with the privilege to pursue game. Rivers ran cleaner than they do today, providing fresh water for drinking and cooking, power for mills that ground grain and fulled cloth, and transportation routes for goods and people. Education in the medieval world was rare and precious. Most people could not read or write, relying instead on oral traditions to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. However, this did not mean they were ignorant or unsophisticated. Farmers possessed deep understanding of weather patterns, soil conditions, and agricultural techniques developed over centuries. Craftsmen held specialized knowledge passed down through long apprenticeships. Even those who could not read often possessed remarkable memories, able to recite long poems, songs, and stories with perfect accuracy. As we prepare to journey deeper into this medieval world, imagine the gradual transition from our modern surroundings to a realm where stone walls are thick and solid, where wooden beams support ceilings that have sheltered people for hundreds of years, where the air carries scents of wood smoke, beeswax candles, and herbs hanging to dry. This is a world where silence has a different quality, unbroken by the constant hum of machinery and electronic devices. Instead, you might hear the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through thatch, the soft footsteps of someone moving carefully through shadowed corridors. The transition we are about to experience is not just a movement through space but also through time, carrying us back to an era when the pace of life was measured and deliberate, when each day brought its own rhythm of activities as predictable as the sunrise and sunset. It is a world that, despite its challenges and hardships, offered a kind of peace and stability that came from living in harmony with natural cycles and in close connection with community and tradition. The first sensation that reaches your consciousness is not sight but sound, a deep, resonant tolling that seems to come from far away, yet penetrates through layers of sleep with surprising clarity. It is the sound of a bell, not the sharp electronic alarm you might expect, but rather the warm, bronze voice of a church bell calling across the countryside. The sound rolls over hills and valleys, through forests and fields, reaching into every corner of the medieval world with its ancient message. This is the bell that marks the hour of prime, the first formal prayer time of the day, when the sun has just begun to paint the eastern horizon with the faintest blush of light. As consciousness slowly returns, you become aware that you are lying on something that feels substantial and real beneath you. It is not the soft, yielding surface of a modern mattress, but rather something more firm and supportive. The bed beneath you appears to be a simple wooden frame, carefully crafted from oak that has been aged to a warm, honey color. The mattress is stuffed with straw and wool, materials that have been prepared with care and skill to provide comfort while maintaining the practical durability needed in a world where everything must be made to last. Over this foundation lies a thick woolen blanket, woven in natural colors that speak of sheep grazing on hillsides under wide skies. The room around you gradually comes into focus as your eyes adjust to the soft, golden light filtering through a small window. This is not the harsh, electric illumination of modern life, but rather the gentle radiance of early morning sunlight as it passes through what appears to be oiled parchment rather than glass. The light has a warm, honey-like quality that bathes everything in a golden glow, creating an atmosphere of peace and tranquility that seems to slow time itself. The walls around you are constructed from massive stone blocks, each one carefully cut and fitted by skilled masons who took pride in their craft. These stones have a subtle warmth to them, as if they have absorbed centuries of sunlight and now radiate that warmth back into the space. The ceiling above reveals heavy wooden beams, each one a single piece of timber that was once a mighty tree growing in ancient forests. These beams have been shaped and smoothed by hand tools wielded by craftsmen who understood wood as intimately as a musician understands their instrument. The surface of the wood shows the gentle marks of their work, not the uniform perfection of machine production, but rather the subtle variations that speak of human hands and individual skill. Between the beams, the ceiling is filled with smaller pieces of wood and clay, creating a surface that has been whitewashed to reflect and amplify the precious light. As you shift slightly on the bed, you notice the quality of silence that surrounds you. This is not the empty quiet of a soundproofed modern room, but rather a living silence filled with subtle sounds that speak of life continuing its ancient patterns. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the gentle lowing of cattle as they are led out to pasture for the day. The sound carries clearly through the still morning air, along with the cheerful calling of roosters proclaiming the arrival of dawn. These sounds do not intrude upon the peace of the morning but rather enhance it, creating a symphony of rural life that has remained unchanged for generations. The air in the room carries scents that are both foreign and somehow familiar. There is the clean smell of well-seasoned wood, the earthy fragrance of wool that has been carefully prepared and woven, and underlying it all, the faint aroma of herbs that have been scattered among the rushes covering the floor. These rushes, you realize, are not merely decorative but serve a practical purpose, providing insulation from the stone floor while releasing pleasant scents when walked upon. Among them, you can detect the fresh smell of meadowsweet, the calming fragrance of lavender, and the clean scent of rosemary, all herbs that were carefully gathered and dried to bring the essence of summer gardens into this peaceful space. The window that provides the gentle morning light offers a view that seems to stretch back through centuries. Beyond the thick stone wall, you can see rolling hills covered with the emerald green of summer pastures. These are not the cultivated, uniform fields of modern agriculture, but rather the patchwork landscape of medieval farming, where small plots are separated by hedgerows and ancient stone walls. In the distance, a village nestles in a valley, its houses clustered around a church whose tower rises like a finger pointing toward heaven. Smoke drifts lazily from several chimneys, speaking of families beginning their daily routines, preparing simple breakfasts over fires that have been carefully banked through the night. The furniture in the room is minimal but beautifully crafted. Besides the bed, there is a simple wooden chest that serves multiple purposes: storage for clothing and personal items, seating when needed, and perhaps even a writing surface when required. The wood has been polished to a soft sheen through years of use, and the corners show the gentle rounding that comes from countless hands touching the same surfaces over decades. Near the window stands a small table, its surface marked by the rings left by cups and bowls, evidence of meals taken while gazing out at the peaceful landscape beyond. On the table sits a ceramic pitcher and bowl, both clearly made by local craftsmen who understood both function and beauty. The pottery has a warm, earthy color that speaks of clay dug from nearby fields and fired in kilns heated with wood from the surrounding forests. The glaze has a subtle variation that could only come from handwork, each piece unique and bearing the mark of its maker's individual skill. Beside these practical items sits a simple wooden cup, carved from a single piece of wood and polished smooth through long use. The floor beneath the scattered rushes reveals itself to be made of stone flags, each one carefully cut and fitted to create a surface that is both practical and pleasing to the eye. These stones have been worn smooth by countless footsteps over the years, creating a surface that feels solid and permanent beneath your feet. The subtle variations in color and texture speak of stone quarried from local hills, each piece carrying within it the geological history of the region. As you become more fully aware of your surroundings, you begin to appreciate the profound sense of craftsmanship that pervades every aspect of this space. Nothing here was mass-produced or created by machines. Instead, every item, from the largest beam to the smallest pin, was made by human hands guided by skills passed down through generations. This is a world where form follows function, but where function never excludes beauty. The result is an environment that feels both practical and deeply satisfying on an aesthetic level. The morning light continues to strengthen, revealing more details of this medieval chamber. You notice that the walls bear a few simple decorations, perhaps a wooden cross carved with intricate patterns, or a small tapestry woven with geometric designs in natural dyes. These decorations are not random ornaments but rather meaningful symbols that connect the inhabitants of this space to their spiritual beliefs and cultural traditions. Outside, the sounds of the waking world continue to filter through the thick walls. You can hear the distant sound of water flowing, perhaps a stream that provides fresh water to the nearby village. There is the occasional creak of a wooden cartwheel, the soft plodding of horses' hooves on dirt paths, and the cheerful voices of people greeting each other as they begin their daily tasks. These sounds create a backdrop of human activity that is somehow both energizing and deeply peaceful. As the morning light grows stronger, casting longer beams across the stone floor of your chamber, you begin to feel a gentle urge to rise and explore the world that lies beyond these thick walls. The process of awakening is unhurried here, guided by natural rhythms rather than the urgent demands of modern schedules. There is no alarm clock demanding immediate attention, no smartphone buzzing with urgent messages. Instead, time moves like honey, sweet and slow, allowing consciousness to emerge gradually and peacefully. The wooden frame of the bed creaks softly as you shift your weight, preparing to stand. This is not the sharp protest of poorly made furniture, but rather the gentle song of seasoned oak that has served faithfully for years and will continue to do so for years to come. The sound is somehow comforting, a reminder that this is a world built to last, where objects are made with care and maintained with respect. As your feet touch the rush-covered floor, you feel the slight give of the dried grasses and herbs beneath your weight, releasing a fresh, clean fragrance that speaks of summer meadows and careful harvesting. Moving to the window, you pause to take in the view that stretches before you. The landscape reveals itself in the growing light as a patchwork of fields, forests, and pastures that seems to have grown naturally over centuries rather than being imposed by human planning. Each field tells a story. Here, golden wheat waves gently in the morning breeze; there, a fallow field allows the earth to rest and recover its strength. Beyond the cultivated areas, dark green forests stretch toward distant hills, their borders irregular and natural, not the straight lines of modern forestry but the organic boundaries that result from centuries of careful management. The air that flows through the window carries with it the essence of this medieval world. It is clean and fresh in a way that seems almost impossible to modern senses, untainted by industrial pollution or chemical processes. Instead, it bears the sense of growing things, fresh grass heavy with dew, wildflowers blooming in hedgerows, the green smell of leaves turning their faces toward the strengthening sun. Underlying these natural fragrances is the faint aroma of wood smoke from cooking fires, a smell that speaks of human habitation without overwhelming the natural perfumes of the countryside. The sounds that accompany the morning are equally peaceful and purposeful. Somewhere below, you can hear the soft voices of people beginning their daily tasks. These voices have a different quality than modern conversation, slower, more deliberate, as if words are chosen with care and spoken without haste. There is laughter too, the kind of genuine mirth that comes from people who work together and share their lives in close community. The sound carries clearly in the still morning air, along with the gentle clanking of wooden buckets, the soft whisper of brooms sweeping courtyards clean, and the rhythmic chopping of wood for the day's fires. From the window, you can see part of what appears to be a courtyard below, paved with the same kind of stone flags that form the floor of your chamber. This courtyard is not empty but rather serves as the center of daily life for the community. Even at this early hour, people are moving about their morning tasks with the easy efficiency of long practice. A young woman carries a wooden bucket toward what must be a well, her long dress sweeping the stones as she walks. Her movements are graceful and unhurried, speaking of a life lived in harmony with natural rhythms rather than artificial deadlines. Near the well, an older man tends to what appears to be a small garden plot where herbs and vegetables grow in neat rows. His movements are careful and knowing as he examines each plant, checking for signs of growth or potential problems. This is clearly someone who understands the language of growing things, who can read the subtle signs that tell of plant health and seasonal changes. The garden itself is a masterpiece of practical beauty, with paths of crushed stone winding between raised beds where useful plants grow alongside flowers that serve both decorative and medicinal purposes. The architectural details visible from your window speak of a building tradition that has evolved over centuries to create structures that are both beautiful and supremely functional. The walls below are constructed from the same massive stone blocks as your chamber, each one cut and fitted with precision that speaks of master craftsmen who took genuine pride in their work. The corners and edges of the building show the subtle refinements that mark truly skilled masonry, not perfect mathematical precision, but rather the kind of accuracy that comes from trained eyes and experienced hands working with natural materials. Windows throughout the building are smaller than modern ones, designed to preserve warmth while still allowing in precious light. Each opening is framed with carefully cut stone, and many are fitted with wooden shutters that can be closed against storms or cold weather. The shutters themselves are works of art, their surfaces carved with simple but elegant patterns that add beauty to their practical function. Some windows show signs of glazing, precious glass that would have been a luxury in medieval times, carefully made by skilled craftsmen and installed with the kind of care reserved for truly valuable materials. The rooflines visible from your vantage point tell their own story of practical adaptation to local conditions. The roofs are steeply pitched to shed rain and snow efficiently, covered with materials that speak of local resources and traditional skills. Some sections show the warm gray of slate quarried from nearby hills, while others display the golden brown of thatch woven from wheat straw with an expertise that turns a simple agricultural byproduct into a weatherproof covering that will last for decades with proper maintenance. As you continue to observe this medieval world awakening around you, you begin to notice the subtle ways in which human activity harmonizes with natural cycles. People emerge from buildings as the light strengthens, beginning tasks that have been performed in much the same way for generations. There is a rhythm to their movements that speaks of deep familiarity with their environment and their work. No one hurries or shows signs of stress. Instead, there is a quality of deliberate purpose that suggests each person knows their role and takes satisfaction in performing it well. The courtyard below gradually becomes more active as the morning progresses. Additional people appear, each contributing to the gentle symphony of daily life. Someone brings fresh water from the well, the wooden bucket creaking softly as it rises on its rope. Another person tends to animals that are beginning to stir in what must be a stable or barn nearby. The sounds of these activities blend together into a peaceful background chorus that speaks of a community working together with the kind of cooperation that comes from shared necessity and mutual respect. From somewhere beyond your immediate view comes the sound of a workshop coming to life, the rhythmic tapping of a hammer on metal, the scraping of wood being shaped by careful tools, the soft voices of craftsmen discussing their work. These sounds do not intrude upon the peace of the morning but rather add to it, creating an atmosphere of productive activity carried out with skill and patience. This is work performed not just for economic necessity but with the kind of pride that comes from creating useful and beautiful objects with one's own hands. The light continues to change and strengthen, revealing new details of the medieval world around you. Colors become more vivid as the sun climbs higher, the deep green of pastures, the warm brown of thatched roofs, the pale gold of stone walls, the rich blue of a sky unmarked by industrial haze. These colors have a clarity and intensity that seems almost impossibly pure, as if you are seeing them for the first time without the filter of modern air pollution and artificial lighting. The time has come to venture beyond the comforting confines of your chamber and explore the broader environment of this medieval sanctuary. As you move toward the heavy wooden door, you notice its construction with new appreciation. This is not a modern hollow-core door but rather a substantial barrier crafted from thick oak planks held together with iron straps forged by skilled blacksmiths. The wood has been smoothed and shaped by hand tools, and the grain patterns tell the story of the tree from which it came, perhaps an ancient oak that grew for centuries in the forests surrounding this place before being carefully selected and harvested for this specific purpose. The iron hinges upon which the door swings are works of art in themselves. Each piece has been heated in coal fires and shaped on anvils by craftsmen who understood metal as intimately as farmers understand soil. The decorative scrollwork that adorns these practical fittings shows the medieval appreciation for beauty even in the most functional objects. Every curve and spiral speaks of hammer blows guided by trained hands and artistic sensibilities that refuse to accept purely utilitarian design when beauty could be achieved with only slightly more effort. As you lift the iron latch, another piece of functional art carved and shaped with care, the door swings open with surprising ease despite its obvious weight. The hinges have been maintained with the kind of attention that keeps things working smoothly for decades or even centuries. Beyond the doorway lies a corridor that continues the theme of substantial construction and careful craftsmanship that characterizes your chamber. The walls here are the same massive stone blocks, but they have been finished with lime plaster that has been tinted with natural pigments to create a warm, cream color that reflects and amplifies the available light. The floor of the corridor is paved with stone flags similar to those in your chamber, but here they show more wear from the passage of countless feet over many years. The stones have been polished to a soft sheen by this constant use, and the slight undulations in their surface speak of the hand tools used to cut and shape them. Between the stones, the mortar joints have been carefully maintained, showing none of the cracks or gaps that would allow drafts or moisture to penetrate. This is maintenance performed by people who understand that small problems addressed promptly prevent major difficulties later. The corridor is lit by a series of narrow windows set high in the walls, each one positioned to capture and channel the maximum amount of natural light. These windows are not large. In a world without central heating, preserving warmth was as important as admitting light, but they are strategically placed and carefully designed to create an environment that feels bright and welcoming despite the limitations of medieval technology. The window openings are deeply recessed in the thick walls, creating alcoves that serve as natural gathering places where the light is strongest. As you walk along this corridor, your footsteps create a soft, muffled sound that speaks of the acoustic properties of stone construction. The thick walls absorb and dampen noise, creating an environment of natural quiet that promotes contemplation and peaceful thought. This is not the dead silence of modern soundproofing but rather a living quiet that allows small sounds to be heard with unusual clarity, the distant singing of birds, the soft whisper of wind moving through the building, the gentle sounds of human activity carried from other parts of the structure. Along the walls of the corridor, you notice several features that speak of both practical function and aesthetic consideration. Small niches carved into the stone hold oil lamps that provide additional light when needed. These lamps are simple but elegant, ceramic vessels shaped by skilled potters and fitted with brass or bronze fittings that show the warm glow that comes from being polished regularly by careful hands. The oil they burn produces a soft, steady light that is far more pleasant than harsh electric illumination, creating an atmosphere of warmth and peace. Other niches hold objects that serve both decorative and practical purposes. Here, a wooden cross carved with intricate Celtic patterns reminds observers of the spiritual dimension of daily life. There, a small stone carving depicts local saints or biblical scenes with the kind of skill that transforms hard stone into flowing fabric and expressive faces. These carvings are not merely decorative but serve as focal points for prayer and meditation, providing spiritual nourishment for those who pass by them during their daily activities. The corridor leads to what appears to be a larger space, perhaps a chapel or communal area where the community gathers for worship and fellowship. As you approach this space, the architectural details become more elaborate while maintaining the same fundamental character of solid construction and careful craftsmanship. The doorway ahead is framed with carved stone that shows the influence of skilled masons who understood both structure and ornament. The carvings depict intertwining vines and leaves, symbols of growth and renewal that have spiritual as well as decorative significance. Above the doorway, a tympanum shows a scene carved in low relief with remarkable skill and sensitivity. The figures depicted here have the kind of grace and dignity that characterizes the best medieval art, not the photographic realism of later periods, but rather a stylized representation that captures spiritual essence rather than mere physical appearance. The drapery flows in elegant curves, the faces show serene expressions of peace and devotion, and the overall composition creates a sense of harmony and balance that prepares the observer for the sacred space beyond. As you pause before entering this larger space, you become more aware of the acoustic environment that surrounds you. From somewhere ahead comes the soft sound of voices engaged in what might be prayer or quiet conversation. These voices have a quality of reverence and peace that suggests people gathered for spiritual purposes rather than merely social interaction. The words are indistinct, but the tone carries clearly, calm, measured, and filled with the kind of quiet joy that comes from shared faith and community fellowship. The air in this part of the building carries different scents than those in your chamber. Here, you detect the fragrance of beeswax candles burning in the space ahead, their clean, natural aroma mixing with the faint smell of incense that speaks of regular worship and ritual observance. There is also the scent of old wood, perhaps from carved choir stalls or other furnishings that have absorbed decades of use and care. These smells combine to create an olfactory signature that speaks immediately of sacred space and spiritual purpose. Looking back along the corridor you have just traversed, you appreciate the skill with which this building has been designed and constructed. The progression from private chamber to semi-public corridor to communal sacred space shows an understanding of human psychology and spiritual needs that guided the medieval builders. Each space prepares the occupant for the next, creating a gradual transition from solitary contemplation to community worship that feels natural and supportive rather than jarring or artificial. The quality of light continues to play an important role in creating the atmosphere of this place. As you have moved from space to space, the lighting has subtly changed while maintaining its essential character of natural warmth and gentle brightness. The architects and builders who created this place understood light not merely as a practical necessity but as a spiritual tool that could enhance worship and promote the kind of peaceful contemplation that brings the soul closer to divine truth. The stonework throughout this section of the building shows the same high level of craftsmanship that you first noticed in your chamber. Each block has been cut and fitted with precision, creating walls that are not only structurally sound but also pleasing to the eye. The masons who built these walls understood their craft as both practical skill and artistic endeavor, taking pride in creating structures that would stand for centuries while providing beauty and inspiration for all who inhabited them. As you prepare to enter the larger communal space ahead, you feel a sense of anticipation mixed with peaceful expectation. This medieval world operates according to rhythms and principles that are different from those of modern life, but they offer their own rewards: a deeper connection to community, a stronger relationship with the natural world, and a more integrated approach to spiritual and practical life. The building around you embodies these principles in stone and wood, creating an environment that supports and nurtures the human spirit while providing for basic physical needs. Stepping across the threshold into the larger communal space, you find yourself in what is unmistakably a chapel or small church, though its intimate size and peaceful atmosphere create a feeling more akin to a private oratory than a grand cathedral. The space envelopes you with a sense of sacred tranquility that seems to have been built into the very stones during construction. Here, the same careful craftsmanship that characterized your chamber and the corridor has been elevated to an even higher level, creating an environment that serves not only practical needs but also the deeper requirements of the human soul for beauty, meaning, and connection to the divine. The ceiling above soars higher than those in the previous spaces, supported by graceful stone arches that demonstrate the medieval mastery of structural engineering combined with aesthetic sensibility. These arches are not merely functional elements but works of art in their own right, each one carefully proportioned and precisely executed to create a sense of upward movement that draws the eye and spirit toward heaven. The stones that form these arches have been cut with extraordinary precision, fitting together without mortar in some places, held in position by the careful balance of forces that the master builders understood through generations of accumulated knowledge and experience. Between the arches, the vaulted ceiling has been painted with natural pigments in colors that have mellowed over the years into subtle, harmonious tones. Deep blues represent the heavens, punctuated by gold stars that catch and reflect the candlelight below. Green vines and leaves wind along the ribs of the vaulting, creating the impression of a garden bower or sacred grove. These paintings are not garish or overwhelming but rather serve to enhance the natural beauty of the stone architecture while adding symbolic content that enriches the spiritual atmosphere of the space. The floor beneath your feet continues the theme of beautiful functionality that characterizes the entire building. Here, however, the stone paving has been supplemented with small areas of decorative tiles arranged in geometric patterns that please the eye while serving the practical purpose of defining different areas within the chapel. These tiles show the warm earth tones that come from local clay fired in kilns heated with wood from the surrounding forests. The patterns they form are not random but rather follow traditional designs that carry symbolic meaning, interlocking circles representing eternity, stylized flowers symbolizing spiritual growth, geometric forms that echo the mathematical harmony that medieval thinkers saw as evidence of divine order in creation. Along the walls of the chapel, carved stone seats provide places for quiet contemplation and prayer. These seats, known as sedilia, have been carved directly from the living rock of the walls, their surfaces polished smooth by centuries of use. Each seat is slightly different, reflecting the hand of individual craftsmen while maintaining the overall unity of design that makes the space feel harmonious and complete. The backs of these seats rise in gentle curves that provide comfort while maintaining the dignified posture appropriate for prayer and meditation. Windows around the chapel admit light in carefully controlled amounts and directions. These are not the large windows of later Gothic architecture but rather smaller openings that preserve the intimate, contemplative atmosphere while still providing sufficient illumination for worship and reading. Each window has been glazed with precious glass that filters the incoming light into soft, colored patterns. The glass itself is clearly handmade, showing the subtle variations in thickness and tone that speak of individual craftsmanship rather than industrial production. Some pieces show the pale green tint that comes from iron impurities in sand, while others have been deliberately colored with precious materials like gold and silver to create jewel-like effects. Near the eastern end of the chapel stands a simple stone altar, its surface worn smooth by countless celebrations of the sacred mysteries. This altar is not ornate or elaborate but rather embodies the medieval principle that true beauty comes from perfect proportions and honest use of materials rather than superficial decoration. The stone from which it has been carved shows subtle variations in color and texture that speak of its geological origins, while the slight depressions worn into its surface by centuries of use create a patina that no amount of artificial aging could duplicate. Above the altar, a simple wooden cross has been mounted on the wall. This cross is not gilded or decorated with precious stones but rather embodies the medieval appreciation for the inherent beauty of well-crafted wood. The grain patterns of the timber tell the story of the tree from which it came, while the smooth finish achieved through patient sanding and polishing creates a surface that seems to glow with inner light. The proportions of the cross follow ancient traditions that create a sense of perfect balance and harmony, reminding observers of the profound spiritual truths it represents. Candles placed strategically around the chapel provide additional light while creating an atmosphere of warmth and sanctity. These are not modern paraffin candles but rather true beeswax tapers that burn with clean, bright flames and fill the air with their subtle, honey-like fragrance. The candlesticks that hold them are works of art in themselves, some carved from wood, others cast in bronze or brass, each one reflecting the skill of craftsmen who understood that objects used in worship should be beautiful as well as functional. The light from these candles dances gently in the slight air currents that move through the space, creating ever-changing patterns of brightness and shadow that add to the contemplative atmosphere. The acoustic properties of this space have been carefully considered during its design and construction. The stone walls and vaulted ceiling create natural resonance that enhances sung prayer and chanted worship while maintaining clarity for spoken words. When voices are raised in this space, they seem to gain depth and richness, as if the building itself participates in the act of worship. Even whispered prayers carry clearly from one end of the chapel to the other, while louder sounds are softened and mellowed rather than becoming harsh or overwhelming. As you settle into one of the carved stone seats, you become aware of the profound sense of peace that pervades this place. This is not merely the absence of noise or distraction but rather a positive quality of tranquility that seems to flow from the very walls and fill every corner of the space. It is the kind of peace that can only develop over time, created by generations of people who have come to this place seeking spiritual refreshment and finding it in abundance. The stones themselves seem to have absorbed the prayers and meditations of countless worshippers, radiating back a sense of sacred presence that is almost tangible. The temperature in the chapel is perfectly comfortable despite the season and the thick stone construction. This comfort comes not from mechanical climate control but rather from the careful attention medieval builders paid to natural heating and cooling principles. The thick walls moderate temperature extremes, while the strategic placement of windows and doors creates gentle air circulation that prevents stuffiness without creating drafts. The result is an environment that feels naturally comfortable and conducive to extended periods of quiet contemplation. From your seat, you can observe the subtle ways in which natural and artificial light interact to create the unique atmosphere of this sacred space. Sunlight filtering through the colored glass windows creates moving patterns on the stone walls and floor, patterns that change slowly as the sun moves across the sky outside. These patterns do not distract from prayer and meditation but rather enhance them, providing gentle visual interest that helps focus the mind while avoiding the kind of bold movements or bright colors that might prove overstimulating. The silence here is not empty but rather filled with the kind of presence that suggests active spiritual life. Even when no formal services are being conducted, the space feels alive with purpose and meaning. This vitality comes partly from the regular use the chapel receives but also from the care and attention that have been lavished on every aspect of its construction and maintenance. This is clearly a place that is loved and valued by those who use it, and that love is evident in every carefully tended detail. As you settle more deeply into the carved stone seat, allowing your body to find its natural position of rest and alertness, you begin to notice the subtle layers of sensory experience that make this medieval chapel such a powerful environment for contemplation and prayer. The stone beneath you, worn smooth by countless other seekers who have sat in this same place over the centuries, seems to emanate a gentle warmth that speaks of the life and devotion it has witnessed. This warmth is not physical heat but rather something more profound, a sense of spiritual energy that has been accumulated and concentrated in this sacred space through generations of faithful use. Your breathing begins to slow and deepen naturally, responding to the peaceful atmosphere that surrounds you. The air you breathe is fresh and clean, carrying with it the subtle fragrances that characterize this holy place. The beeswax candles contribute their pure, natural scent, while the old wood of the furnishings adds its own warm, comforting aroma. Underlying these more obvious smells is something harder to define, perhaps the scent of stone that has been blessed by time and use, or the faint remaining traces of incense that has been burned here during countless services over the years. The quality of light in the chapel continues to evolve as the sun moves across the sky outside, creating an ever-changing but always gentle illumination that seems designed to promote inner reflection. The colored glass in the windows transforms ordinary sunlight into something precious and beautiful, casting patches of blue, green, and gold onto the stone walls and floor. These colored lights move slowly and predictably, following patterns established by the sun's path that have been repeated daily for as long as this building has stood. There is something deeply comforting about this reliability, this connection to cosmic rhythms that transcend human concerns and remind observers of their place in a larger, divinely ordered universe. As your eyes adapt more fully to the subtle lighting conditions, you begin to notice details in the stone carving that were not immediately apparent. The capitals of the columns that support the arches above are decorated with intricate patterns that reveal themselves gradually to patient observation. Here, stylized leaves and flowers wind around the stone in spirals that seem to grow naturally from the architectural forms. There, faces peer out from among foliage, not frightening gargoyles but rather gentle countenances that seem to watch over the sacred space with benevolent attention. These carvings are not merely decorative but serve as focal points for meditation, providing visual anchors for contemplative prayer while contributing to the overall atmosphere of peace and sanctity. The floor tiles near your feet reveal their own subtle beauties when examined with the kind of patient attention that this environment naturally encourages. Each tile is slightly different from its neighbors, bearing the marks of individual craftsmanship that mass production could never duplicate. The colors range from deep earth browns to warm cream tones, with occasional tiles showing the green or blue glazes that required special skills and precious materials to achieve. The patterns formed by these tiles are not complex or overwhelming but rather create gentle rhythms that please the eye without demanding attention, supporting contemplation rather than distracting from it. The acoustic environment of the chapel reveals new layers as you listen with increasing attention. Beyond the immediate silence, you become aware of very distant sounds that penetrate even these thick walls, the soft lowing of cattle in distant pastures, the occasional call of birds, the far-off sound of someone chopping wood for the day's fires. These sounds do not intrude upon the sacred atmosphere but rather serve to connect the chapel to the larger world of God's creation, reminding those who pray here that the sacred and secular dimensions of life are not separate but rather different aspects of a unified whole. Your hands, resting naturally on the stone seat beside you, can feel the subtle textures that generations of worshippers have created through their presence in this place. The stone has been polished not by machinery but by the countless hands that have touched it, the countless bodies that have rested against it during prayer and meditation. This human polish has created a surface that is smooth without being slippery, warm without being heated, comfortable in a way that only comes from long use by people who valued and cared for the place they inhabited. The spiritual atmosphere of the chapel becomes more apparent as you allow yourself to relax into the environment it provides. This is not a place where you must create or manufacture a sense of the sacred but rather one where that sacred presence is already established and waiting to be experienced. The countless prayers that have been offered here, the services that have been conducted, the quiet meditations that have taken place, all of these have contributed to creating an atmosphere where spiritual awareness comes naturally and easily. As your contemplation deepens, you begin to appreciate the wisdom embedded in the architectural choices that shape this space. Every element seems designed to support and enhance the inner life of prayer and meditation. The proportions of the room create a sense of harmony and balance that promotes mental equilibrium. The materials used, stone, wood, glass, metal, all speak of permanence and stability while maintaining the organic warmth that keeps the space from feeling cold or forbidding. The colors are subtle and restful, avoiding the kind of bold contrasts that might overstimulate the nervous system while providing enough visual interest to support extended contemplation. The play of light and shadow throughout the chapel creates natural focal points for meditative attention. The brightest areas draw the eye naturally, while the shadowed corners provide restful spaces where the mind can relax. The movement of these light patterns as the sun progresses across the sky ensures that the visual environment never becomes static or boring, while the slow pace of change prevents any sense of urgency or restlessness. This is lighting designed not for efficient work but for the inner work of spiritual development and contemplative prayer. Your body begins to find its natural rhythms of rest and alertness as you settle more completely into this environment. The stone seat, which might have seemed uncomfortable at first, reveals itself to be perfectly designed for extended periods of quiet sitting. The slight curves and angles provide support where it is needed while allowing the spine to maintain its natural alignment. The height of the seat allows your feet to rest comfortably on the floor while your hands find natural positions on your lap or beside you. This is furniture designed by people who understood the requirements of contemplative practice and who had the skill to create forms that serve those requirements perfectly. The temperature in the chapel maintains its perfect balance, neither too warm nor too cool, allowing your body to relax completely without any awareness of physical discomfort. This thermal comfort comes not from artificial climate control but from the natural insulating properties of thick stone walls and the careful attention medieval builders paid to orientation and air circulation. The result is an environment where physical awareness can fade into the background, allowing attention to turn inward to the deeper currents of spiritual life. As the minutes pass in this profound quiet, you begin to understand something of what the medieval builders achieved in creating this space. This is not merely a room where religious activities take place but rather an environment specifically designed to facilitate encounter with the divine. Every element works together to create conditions where prayer becomes natural, where meditation flows easily, where the barriers between human consciousness and divine presence seem to dissolve. This is architecture in service of the soul, building techniques applied to the ancient human quest for meaning and transcendence. In the continuing stillness of this sacred space, as afternoon light begins to slant through the medieval windows at different angles, you find yourself entering deeper states of contemplative awareness that seem to arise naturally from the environment itself. The chapel has become more than a physical space, it has transformed into a kind of spiritual vessel that carries you gently away from ordinary concerns and into realms of consciousness that feel both ancient and eternal. Time seems to lose its normal meaning here, not because it has stopped but because it has taken on a different quality, flowing like honey rather than rushing like a mountain stream. The boundary between yourself and the space around you begins to soften in ways that feel perfectly natural and peaceful. The stone walls that initially seemed like barriers now feel more like extensions of your own being, as if the centuries of prayer and meditation that have taken place here have created a field of spiritual energy that embraces and includes anyone who enters with an open heart. This is not a loss of individual identity but rather an expansion of awareness that allows you to experience your connection to the long chain of souls who have sought God in this place before you. Your breathing has become so slow and natural that you are barely aware of it, yet each breath seems to bring not only air but also something more subtle, perhaps the essence of sanctity that pervades every molecule of atmosphere in this consecrated space. The rhythm of your breathing begins to synchronize with rhythms you can sense but not quite identify, perhaps the slow pulse of the building itself as it expands and contracts with temperature changes, or the deeper rhythms of the earth beneath the foundations, or even the cosmic rhythms of sun and moon and stars that have governed life in this place since its beginning. The play of colored light from the windows has created patterns on the stone floor that seem to pulse gently with their own inner life. Blues and greens and golds shift and blend as clouds pass overhead and the sun continues its ancient journey across the sky. These patterns are not random but follow the intentions of the craftsmen who created the windows, medieval artisans who understood color and light as spiritual languages capable of speaking directly to the soul without requiring translation by the analytical mind. Each hue carries its own message, blue speaking of heaven and transcendence, green of growth and renewal, gold of divine glory and eternal truth. The carved stone figures that decorate the capitals and walls seem to have taken on a subtle animation, not moving in any physical sense but somehow more present and alive than they appeared earlier. Their faces, worn smooth by centuries but still retaining the essential expressions carved by their creators, seem to radiate a gentle benevolence that speaks of divine love made manifest in human skill and devotion. These are not mere decorations but rather spiritual presences, guardians and companions for those who seek to penetrate the mysteries of faith and contemplation. Your awareness of physical sensation has not disappeared but has been transformed into something more refined and spiritual. The stone seat beneath you no longer feels hard or cold but rather seems to provide exactly the support your body needs for this extended period of contemplation. The temperature of the air around you feels perfect, neither warm nor cool but simply present in a way that allows your attention to remain focused on inner realities rather than external discomforts. Your hands and feet seem to have found their ideal positions without any conscious adjustment, as if the space itself is teaching your body how to be present in the most beneficial way. The silence that surrounds you has deepened into something that goes beyond the mere absence of sound. This is the pregnant silence of creation itself, the silence that existed before the first word was spoken and that will remain when all words have been said. Within this silence, you can sense rather than hear the presence of something vast and loving that permeates not only this chapel but all of existence. This presence does not announce itself with fanfare or demand attention through dramatic manifestations but rather waits patiently to be noticed by those who have learned to be still enough to perceive its gentle reality. The boundaries between past, present, and future begin to blur in ways that reveal their artificial nature. You sense the presence of all those who have prayed in this place before you, monks and nuns, lords and peasants, children and elders, each bringing their own hopes and fears and gratitude to this altar of stone and silence. Their prayers seem to echo still in the vaulted spaces above, not as sounds but as spiritual reverberations that continue to bless and sanctify the atmosphere. You also sense those who will come after you, future seekers who will find in this place the same peace and spiritual nourishment that you are experiencing now. The stone walls themselves seem to be repositories of spiritual energy accumulated over centuries of sacred use. Each block bears within its crystalline structure the memory of countless prayers, hymns, and meditations that have taken place in its presence. This is not imagination but rather a recognition of the way intention and consciousness can influence even inanimate matter, creating environments that support and enhance the spiritual activities that take place within them. The medieval builders understood this principle intuitively, choosing materials and methods that would create spaces capable of holding and concentrating spiritual energy for the benefit of all who would use them. Your mind, freed from its usual concerns with daily necessities and future anxieties, begins to experience a quality of peace that seems to come from a source beyond individual consciousness. This peace is not the temporary quiet that comes from the absence of problems but rather the fundamental peace that underlies all existence, the peace that passes understanding because it does not depend on external circumstances but rather flows from the deepest reality of being itself. This is the peace that the medieval contemplatives sought and found, the peace that inspired them to build places like this chapel where others could discover the same profound rest for their souls. The realization gradually dawns that this experience of transcendent peace is not unique to this place or this moment but rather represents a return to your natural state of being. The anxieties and distractions that normally occupy your attention are revealed to be temporary clouds that obscure but cannot ultimately diminish the sun of consciousness that shines constantly within. The chapel has not created this peace but rather provided conditions where your natural state of spiritual wholeness can be recognized and experienced without interference from the normal activities of daily life. Light from the windows continues to shift and change, creating a visual symphony that speaks of the dynamic nature of creation itself. Nothing in this chapel is static or dead but rather everything participates in the continuous dance of existence that medieval theologians saw as evidence of divine creativity and love. The stones live, the wood breathes, the metal fittings expand and contract with temperature changes, the very air moves in currents too subtle for ordinary perception but somehow sensible to consciousness that has been refined through contemplative practice. As this deeper contemplation continues, you begin to understand something of the mystery that drew people to dedicate their lives to prayer and meditation in places like this. The medieval monastics were not escaping from life but rather discovering its deepest meaning, not avoiding reality but penetrating to its essential nature. In the silence and simplicity of sacred spaces like this chapel, the artificial complications that often obscure life's true purpose fall away, revealing the fundamental truth that existence itself is a gift to be received with gratitude and wonder rather than a problem to be solved through effort and anxiety. As the afternoon light begins its gradual transition toward evening, the quality of illumination in the chapel shifts to even softer, more golden tones that seem to whisper of the approaching time of rest and renewal. The sun has moved far enough across the sky that the colored glass windows now cast different patterns on the stone floor, patterns that speak of the natural progression of time and the wisdom of following rhythms established by the Creator rather than those imposed by human urgency. This gentle change in light serves as a natural invitation to begin the slow transition from active contemplation toward the blessed passivity of sacred sleep. Your body, which has been held in perfect comfort during the extended period of meditation, begins to experience a subtle relaxation that goes deeper than mere physical rest. This is the kind of profound letting go that can only occur when the nervous system recognizes that it is in a completely safe and sacred environment where no vigilance or effort is required. The stone seat beneath you seems to soften somehow, not physically but in the way it supports your body, as if the very molecules of limestone are conspiring to cradle you in perfect comfort as you prepare to surrender conscious control. The sounds that filter into the chapel from the world outside have changed their character as the medieval day draws toward its close. Where earlier you might have heard the sounds of active work, the chopping of wood, the movement of animals, the voices of people engaged in daily tasks, now the soundscape speaks of quieter activities and gradual settling. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls slowly, marking one of the canonical hours that structure monastic life. The sound rolls across the countryside like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of peace that seem to reach into every corner of creation. Your breathing has become so natural and effortless that it seems less like something you are doing and more like something that is being done through you by the same creative force that moves the wind through trees and draws water toward the sea. Each inhalation brings not only air but also a sense of receiving grace, while each exhalation carries away not only carbon dioxide but also any remaining tensions or concerns that might interfere with the perfect rest that awaits. This breathing connects you to the fundamental rhythms of life itself, rhythms that have sustained human existence since the beginning of time. The temperature in the chapel has reached that perfect point where the body requires no energy to maintain comfort, where clothing neither restricts nor fails to provide adequate coverage, where the skin experiences neither heat nor cold but simply the gentle embrace of air that seems to have been blessed by its contact with this sacred space. This thermal comfort is one of the many small gifts that this environment offers to those who enter it with openness and reverence, gifts that speak of the attention medieval builders paid to creating spaces that would serve human needs in their deepest and most essential forms. As evening approaches, the artificial light from the beeswax candles becomes more prominent relative to the natural light from the windows, creating an atmosphere that is both intimate and otherworldly. The warm yellow glow of the candle flame seems to pulse gently with a life of its own, each flame dancing in response to air currents too subtle for ordinary perception but somehow visible in the fluid movements of the light. These flames serve as focal points for contemplation while also creating the kind of soft, warm illumination that naturally prepares consciousness for the receptive states that precede sleep. Your mind, which earlier was actively engaged in contemplation and meditation, now begins to experience a different quality of consciousness, less focused on particular thoughts or insights and more open to the general atmosphere of peace and sanctity that pervades this place. This is not a dulling or diminishing of awareness but rather a broadening and deepening, as if consciousness is expanding to fill the entire chapel and perhaps beyond, connecting with the vast network of spiritual energy that links all sacred places and all seeking souls across time and space. The stone walls that surround you seem to pulse gently with accumulated spiritual energy, like a slow heartbeat that connects your individual existence to the larger rhythms of creation. This energy is not dramatic or overwhelming but rather gentle and supportive, like the embrace of a loving parent who provides security without constraint, protection without imprisonment. The walls that might once have seemed like barriers now feel like sources of strength and stability, grounding your consciousness in the reality of divine love made manifest in human craft and dedication. The carved decorations throughout the chapel take on a softer appearance in the changing light, their edges blurred slightly by shadows that seem to wrap around them like gentle blankets. The faces that peer out from among stone foliage seem more peaceful now, their expressions reflecting the same quality of serene preparation for rest that you are experiencing. These carved figures serve as silent companions in your journey toward sleep, guardians who will watch over your rest just as they have watched over countless others who have found refuge and renewal in this sacred space. Your sense of individual identity begins to relax its usually firm boundaries, not disappearing but rather becoming more porous and flexible. You remain fully yourself while also becoming more aware of your connection to all the life that surrounds you, the life present in the other people in the building, the life in the animals and plants outside, the life that pulses through the very stones of the chapel itself. This expanded awareness brings with it a profound sense of security and belonging, the knowledge that you are held and supported by a web of existence that is fundamentally loving and benevolent. The transition toward sleep begins not as an abrupt change but as a gradual shift in the quality of consciousness, like the slow dimming of light as clouds gather before a gentle rain. Your thoughts become less linear and more associative, drifting like leaves on a slow-moving stream rather than marching like soldiers toward predetermined destinations. This mental relaxation is not a loss of clarity but rather a different kind of clarity, one that is more receptive and intuitive than analytical and controlling. Physical sensations throughout your body begin to take on a dreamy quality, as if the boundaries between your physical form and the space around you are becoming more fluid and permeable. Your hands and feet feel warm and relaxed, your shoulders and neck release tensions you were not even aware of carrying, your facial muscles soften into expressions of peace and contentment. This bodily relaxation happens naturally and effortlessly, supported by the profound safety and sanctity of the environment that surrounds you. The acoustic environment of the chapel shifts subtly as evening approaches, with the stone walls and vaulted ceiling seeming to amplify the quality of silence rather than merely containing it. Any small sounds that do occur, the whisper of fabric against stone, the soft settling of wooden furnishings as they adjust to temperature changes, the distant sound of wind moving through the building, serve only to deepen the overall atmosphere of peace and preparation for rest. The air itself seems to have taken on a different quality, becoming softer and more nurturing, as if it has been blessed by its long residence in this sacred space and now carries that blessing to all who breathe it. Each breath brings not only physical sustenance but also spiritual nourishment, filling your being with the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do, surrounded by exactly the right conditions for profound rest and renewal. As the last traces of afternoon light fade from the chapel windows and the gentle glow of candlelight becomes the primary source of illumination, you find yourself entering the final phase of this sacred journey toward rest. The transition happens so naturally and gradually that it feels less like falling asleep and more like being gradually embraced by a divine presence that has been patiently waiting throughout your time of contemplation and prayer. The boundary between waking consciousness and sacred sleep becomes as soft and permeable as morning mist, allowing you to drift between states of awareness without any sense of loss or disconnection. The stone seat that has supported your meditation now seems to transform itself into the most comfortable resting place imaginable, not through any physical change but through the deep relaxation that has suffused every fiber of your being. Your body settles more completely into its natural curves and contours, finding a position of such perfect ease that movement becomes unnecessary and unwanted. The stone, which earlier felt solid and distinct, now seems to merge with your own physical form, creating a sense of unity between yourself and the ancient foundations of this sacred place. Your breathing continues its slow, natural rhythm, but now each breath seems to draw you deeper into a state of receptive peace that prepares the way for divine dreams and restorative sleep. The air you breathe carries with it not only the physical sustenance your body requires but also the accumulated blessings of centuries of prayer and worship that have sanctified every molecule of atmosphere within these walls. Each exhalation releases not only physical waste but also any remaining traces of worldly concern or spiritual tension that might interfere with the perfect rest that awaits. The candlelight that fills the chapel creates an atmosphere of such warmth and safety that your nervous system recognizes at the deepest level that no vigilance or alertness is required here. The flames dance gently in response to air currents that seem to breathe through the building itself, creating patterns of light and shadow that are as soothing as a lullaby and as peaceful as a mother's embrace. These dancing lights serve as the last focal points for conscious attention before awareness transitions into the different but equally sacred realm of sleep and dreams. Your mind, which earlier was engaged in active contemplation and meditation, now experiences a quality of consciousness that is perfectly balanced between awareness and rest. Thoughts continue to arise, but they have the quality of gentle waves on a peaceful lake rather than urgent demands for attention or response. These thoughts drift through consciousness like clouds across a summer sky, beautiful and interesting but requiring no effort to pursue or dismiss. This mental state is neither sleep nor waking but rather a sacred twilight consciousness that serves as a bridge between the two. The sounds that reach your awareness have become even more subtle and peaceful as the medieval day draws to its close. The bell that marked the canonical hours has fallen silent, its voice having guided the faithful through their cycle of prayer and work. In its place, you hear only the gentle sounds of a community settling into rest, the soft footsteps of someone moving quietly through distant corridors, the whisper of fabric as monks arrange their simple bedding, the subtle creaking of ancient timbers as the building adjusts to the cooling temperatures of evening. Your physical body continues its journey toward complete relaxation and rest, each muscle group releasing its tension in a natural progression that requires no conscious direction or effort. Your feet and legs feel wonderfully heavy and warm, as if they are being gently embraced by the stone floor beneath them. Your torso relaxes into the support of the seat, while your arms and hands find positions of such natural comfort that they seem to have been designed specifically for this moment and this place. Your neck and shoulders release the last vestiges of the tension that comes from holding oneself upright during waking hours. The temperature in the chapel has reached that perfect point where physical comfort is so complete that bodily awareness fades into the background, allowing consciousness to focus entirely on spiritual and emotional realities. The air around you feels like a gentle embrace that supports and surrounds you without any sense of constriction or limitation. This is the kind of environmental perfection that can only be achieved through the marriage of skilled craftsmanship with deep understanding of human needs, the kind of perfection that medieval builders achieved through centuries of accumulated wisdom and experience. As consciousness continues its gentle transition toward sleep, the boundaries between yourself and the sacred space around you become increasingly fluid and permeable. You are still completely yourself, but you are also somehow part of the chapel, part of the community that finds refuge here, part of the long tradition of seekers who have discovered in places like this the peace and renewal that their souls require. This expansion of identity brings with it a profound sense of security and belonging that makes perfect rest not only possible but inevitable. The carved stone figures that decorate the chapel seem to have taken on the role of gentle guardians, watching over your rest with the same benevolent attention they have given to countless others who have found sanctuary in this place. Their faces, worn smooth by centuries but still retaining the essential expressions carved by their creators, radiate a quality of protective love that ensures your sleep will be both safe and sacred. These stone sentinels connect your individual rest to the great communion of saints and souls who surround and support all who seek refuge in sacred places. Your sense of time continues to expand and dissolve until past, present, and future exist simultaneously in an eternal now that encompasses all of history and all of hope. In this timeless moment, you are connected not only to your own need for rest and renewal but also to the rest and renewal of all creation, to the rhythm of day and night that has governed life on earth since the beginning, to the cosmic cycles of expansion and contraction that govern the universe itself. Your individual sleep becomes part of the great sleep of creation, your individual dreams part of the great dream of divine love. The last traces of conscious control slip away as naturally as the last light of day fades from the western windows. There is no struggle or resistance, no sense of loss or abandonment, but rather a feeling of coming home to a place of perfect safety and infinite love. The transition into sleep happens with the same natural inevitability as the transition from day to night, guided by rhythms that are older than human civilization and more reliable than any human institution. As sacred sleep finally claims you completely, your last conscious awareness is of gratitude, gratitude for this place of refuge and renewal, gratitude for the tradition of faith and devotion that created and maintains it, gratitude for the opportunity to experience the kind of rest that refreshes not only body and mind but also the deepest dimensions of the human soul. This gratitude becomes the foundation for dreams that will be filled with beauty and meaning, dreams that will continue the work of spiritual renewal that began with your first glimpse of this medieval sanctuary. In the gentle embrace of sacred sleep, surrounded by walls that have sheltered centuries of seekers, watched over by carved guardians who never tire in their vigil, breathing air that has been blessed by countless prayers and hymns, you find the perfect rest that your soul has been seeking. This is not merely the absence of waking consciousness but rather the presence of a different kind of awareness, a dream consciousness that allows for healing and renewal that goes far beyond what ordinary sleep can provide. The candles continue to burn through the night, their gentle flames maintaining the sacred atmosphere even as consciousness rests. The stone walls continue their eternal vigil, holding space for dreams and visions that connect individual souls to the great mystery of divine love. And in this perfect environment, sleep becomes not an escape from reality but rather an entrance into the deepest reality of all, the reality of absolute peace, unconditional love, and infinite possibility that underlies all existence and waits patiently to embrace all who seek it with open hearts. Sweet dreams, dear soul. Rest well in this place where time stands still and love abides forever. May your sleep be deep and refreshing, your dreams filled with beauty and wonder, and your awakening blessed with renewed strength for the journey that lies ahead. In this sacred space, protected by stone and prayer, surrounded by the communion of all who have found refuge here before you, you are safe to rest completely, knowing that you are held in arms of love that will never let you fall.